Hi, this is Kiernan Brandt, cow-calf field specialist out of the Watertown Regional Office. We are here at the 2021 Range Cow Beef Symposium. Our next guest is Dr. Shelby Rosasco from the University of Wyoming, who gave a really good presentation today on heifer development and how we can really emphasize some selection techniques and criteria that we're putting those heifers through to really help them out in going above and beyond, setting them up as cows moving into our functional reproductive herds. And I think we're going to start off by having you kind of highlight what exactly are the areas that we're looking at when we're talking about programming fertility. What areas of the cow, what components go into that?
So really, what I tried to point out in my presentation was when we're talking about programming fertility in our heifers especially, we're really looking at what happens in that first year of life and what specific areas during development can we target, especially from a nutritional standpoint. And so we spoke a little bit on targeting that pre-weaning time point, or right between that 2 to 6 months of age and even a little bit after that. And then we kind of moved in and talked about during that post-weaning time point, again, how can we use nutrition to try to boost that fertility in those heifers. And I kind of look at it as a programming effect because we're using nutrition to mediate effect and have a significant impact on those heifers from a fertility and reproduction standpoint.
And one component that I thought was just super intriguing was the idea of increasing the amount of antral follicles present in the ovary of these young developing heifers. I mean, in reality, we're only going to be asking these females to maybe, an above and beyond exceptional cow will raise 12 or 15 calves in her lifetime, and we all have heard stories about those cows. But you're thinking about it from a little bit different perspective, because in reality, she's not going to end up ever using all of those follicles in that ovary. But you're actually considering the rate at which she's using those groups of follicles. Is that correct?
Yeah. So really, what that was looking at was the microscopic follicles. So those primordial follicles are the first stages of those follicles. And we've always believed that they're formed during gestation. We can't alter that. And so some of the data that I talked about today was really looking at how we can use nutrition, and specifically a stairstep rate of gain, and actually slow the rate of activation of those follicles. So we're slowing the rate at which these heifers are using those follicles. And even though they don't necessarily run out of follicles over their lifetime, we do reach that stage of reproductive senescence where they're no longer cycling, they can't keep up. And so part of our theory behind it is maybe we're able to increase longevity as well as fertility in those animals, since we know that a larger ovarian reserve can be corresponding or correlated with higher fertility in those heifers.
Sure. And so when we're talking about follicular recruitment, we're maybe emphasizing a little bit more quality to the amount of those, or quality of those follicles rather than the quantity of a broad range, I suppose. You mentioned a stair-step development program when talking about our heifers. Can you give us a little bit more information as to what that is?
Yeah, so really a stair-step development program can be a number of things. So we talked about a couple different ones, but really we have to think of it kind of like an actual stair-step, where there's going to be periods of higher rates of gain, then we're going to put them on periods of lower rates of gain, then maybe step them up again to a period of high rate of gain. That was the pre-weaning studies we talked about. There were several steps in that. The post-weaning studies we talked about, there was really only they started on a lower rate of gain, and then we stepped them up to that higher rate of gain. And one of the reasons we use that is we get really good compensatory growth, and so they perform better than we anticipate on these stair-step type systems.
Sure. And during your presentation, you actually mentioned that our impact to program these heifers, or our ability to impact these heifers nutritionally, is actually greater during that pre-weaning phase. Is that right?
Yeah, so from a puberty standpoint, there's actually some research out there that's showing that how we feed these heifers between 2 and 6 months of age has a bigger impact and can actually decrease the age at puberty more significantly or faster than nutrition during that post-weaning phase. And so it's a really kind of interesting concept to think about.
Right, and it kind of shifts the paradigm on its head a little bit. When we're thinking about developing these heifers, it's always about rate of gain and target body weight percentage and stuff that we're doing during that post-weaning phase. And I guess along those lines, what's the current recommendations? What's the literature telling us in terms of body weight percentage? I know that's ranged anywhere from 50 to 65, and there's still, you'll probably hear people on either side of that number as well. So
yeah, so I think to me, I don't ever look at it like this is specific body weight I should target. I think we have to look at the environment that we're developing our heifers in. If we can easily get those heifers with the resources we have to 65% and it's economically feasible for us, I don't think there's any problem with that. If we're having to push these heifers really hard, use a lot of nutritional inputs, high concentrate type diets to do that, I think that starts to limit the economic viability. And that's where maybe those more extensive systems where we're out on range, or maybe we're utilizing a development system where we're only pushing those heifers to 55% mature body weight is a little better. And so I know I kind of scapegoat around giving an answer there, but I think each operation is unique and we have to take that into account when we give recommendations.
That classic extension answer of it depends. But that is a valid point. There's a variety of scenarios, and I think it just goes to highlight that both kind of ends of the spectrum, both methods of thinking, optimal, maximal, nature, nurture, both have a time and a place, and both can be done effectively. And as long as they're being done efficiently, I think that's really the driving factor there, and especially a year like this where we're fighting a lot of drought.
Exactly.
Kind of going back to that stair-step method, and especially on the economic side of things, you guys did some different things there in terms of dry lot versus range development. You want to talk about that a little bit?
So we didn't actually do an economic analysis yet. I think that's certainly coming in the next stages of that project. I think really the goal for us was to give producers options, right? A lot of times we see these studies done in the dry lot, and if a producer is doing something out on range, they're limited in how much they can control how they're feeding that animal or the intake of that animal, because we can't control intake in a range setting. And so that was really our goal with kind of comparing the dry lot and the native range. And I think when we do that economic analysis, there'll be some interesting things to look at. I don't know that we'll see huge differences because of the levels that we had those supplements at. I think they'll end up kind of coming out a little even, but I'm really interested to see if maybe that range situation was a little cheaper than developing those heifers in the dry lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be a nice addition to the literature. So what results did you guys see in your study comparing those two systems?
From an economic standpoint?
No, in terms of reproductive success, or what other parameters were you guys interested in looking at?
So because we took ovaries out in order to do the microscopic follicle counts, we weren't able to follow out for pregnancy rates or anything like that. We did see similarities in reproductive tract scores in those heifers regardless of treatment or if they were developed in the dry lot or a native range. We also were able to do some measurements on follicular dynamics, specifically on that dominant follicle. And we actually saw some really interesting effects where heifers developed on native range had an increase in dominant follicle diameter. They had an increase in estradiol concentrations, suggesting to us that maybe, at least in that specific study or that particular year, those native range developed heifers might have had an increase in fertility. Right,
because we always associate that larger follicle, more estrogen, stronger heats, better chance of getting pregnant, right?
Yep.
All those good things.
Yeah, and that increase in estrogen, in some of our in vitro fertilization systems, we actually see that increase in estradiol actually supports blastocyst formation and an increase in that rate.
Right, which ends up in a healthy embryo and ultimately a baby calf on the ground.
Yep.
Great. Well, and I think I heard you mentioning at lunch that you guys are planning on taking this one step further and doing some uterine flushes. Do you want to talk about any of that stuff or future research you guys have going on in this area?
Yeah, so we actually repeated the stairstep study that I did at New Mexico State this last year in Wyoming. And we, instead of setting them up to collect ovaries, ideally when we would AI, so roughly 36 hours after we pulled that seed or gave that shot of prostaglandin, we actually switched and did day 16 of the estrus cycle because we wanted to look at the luteal phase specifically and how that impacts, how that stairstep diet is actually impacting the uterine environment. And so we went in and took some uterine biopsies, and we're really interested to look at what that stairstep diet is actually doing to the uterine environment, and that's kind of our next step moving forward.
Sure. Well, hopefully you'll have those results in 2 years for the next Ranged Beef Cow Symposium.
I sure hope so.
We look forward to having those. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.